Hello.
Wow, that's loud. That's Amy who's scheduling that. I don't know where she is, but good morning. This week's Torah portion is on Exodus chapter 21 through 24, and we're in the section of the story where God first gives, the 10 Commandments, the first big set of laws to Israel. He's speaking to Moses. Daniel did a great job last week on the Torah portion. He's speaking to Moses. He's out on Mount Sinai, and Israel, they heard God's voice tell them the 10 Commandments, and they're like, no, that's too scary. Moses, you speak on our behalf. And so now Moses is up at Mount Sinai receiving all these laws, and the majority of this portion is going through a lot of the different laws, such as like slavery, restitution of property, Sabbaths, feasts, things like that. And then we got a promise given to Moses about the future conquest of Canaan, and then Moses comes down, gives the rules to Israel. They accept the terms of the covenant, and then we have this really neat feast, this interaction between the Lord and Moses, Aaron's sons, and 70 of Israel's elders. And it said they beheld God while sharing a meal with them. So I thought that was pretty cool. How awesome would it be to just like sit down and have like a Wendy's burger with God? That'd be awesome. You want that 4 for $4? I got you. Which they don't have the 4 for $4 anymore, do they? Yeah, they don't have the 4 for $4 anymore. It's big sad. But in this part of the portion, we enter one of the harder parts of the Old Testament of the Scriptures for me, and it's a part that I've always found to be really difficult, something that I've wrestled with. And that's being the laws about slavery. It's a topic I've heard Bible skeptics and atheists use to try and cut down our Christian faith and try to question God's morality, asking why didn't he just eradicate it once and for all, right? The core message of the Bible is all men are created in the image of God. We're all equal. So why is God regulating something that allows people to call other people their property? And so the problem with some of the questioning from those who are on the other side, who are skeptics of the Scriptures, is that a lot of times they're using, a 21st century cultural context as lenses to which they interpret what was written to with people who lived thousands of years ago in a vastly different culture with its own context. It isn't even comparable to today. And so we need to define terms. We need to look at the culture of that time. So a slave was, by definition, someone who was owned by another person as property. And the Mosaic Law was given during a time where the institution of state slavery was already well established. And so it regulated it. And I find it interesting because we see in the Bible how it honestly, it feels like it rarely tells us to overthrow established systems, governments, etc., that are already established that we find ourselves in, be it political or something else, and instead instructs us how to live and behave within those structures. Take Jesus with the Roman government, for example. When asked about how to handle taxes or in the governing body of that time, Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Or another interesting aspect in Jeremiah chapter 29, God's instructing Israel, who were being exiled and being under the rule of the Babylonian Empire, who murdered their friends and their family, who conquered them and slaughtered them, to pray for their peace and their prosperity and to seek the well-being of the government that they're in. And so it's interesting because it seems like rather than attempting to tear down some of these systems, it's asking us to be a light in those systems and a light to those around us wherever we find ourselves, whether culture or circumstance we're in. And so when we look at the ancient Near East, we see an institution of slavery, and that culture, that wasn't really a morality issue in that culture. And if we attempt to cross-examine what we find in the law regarding slavery, and we compare it to a standard of today, in today's culture, well, I would hope you wouldn't try to defend its use of those laws in today. I would hope that wouldn't be something that you'd want to do because it becomes kind of troublesome when you try to justify owning a slave in today's American context. And so we look at some of the commands about slavery, and we see that it's a lot more akin to indentured servitude rather than typical, like, chattel, you're my property slavery. And we get a good idea of this in Leviticus, but it's not exactly how we think. In Leviticus 25:39, I'm trying to race the clock, where we get a command that if a fellow Israelite sells himself to you, he is not to be worked or treated but as a slave, not to do slave labor, fellow Israelite. And then a few verses later, we're told that you may buy your slaves from around the nations around you, from the nations around you. So we can see kind of this contrast between how slavery was practiced among fellow Israel and among outside nations. And it's interesting because we can see that they were both practiced in Israel, both property slavery and both a more indentured servitude type of slavery. First to Israel and second to non-Israelites. And it makes us really uncomfortable in the 21st century when we read these laws and we read about the Bible and we look at how God commanded things. And I think that's okay that it makes us uncomfortable. I'm not standing here trying to tear apart or question the Bible's morality or God's morality, God forbid, but wanting to share a journey in some of my struggles and difficulties with the law. The law of Moses in that time was absolutely revolutionary in its justice and treatment towards the poor, towards women, and slaves. And in that, it just changed the way that people in that culture treated each other and treated the lower class. And it was a necessary step in God's plan of changing the hearts of mankind. Interesting, we look at Christ in Mark chapter 10 when asked about divorce. He says, Moses wrote this command for you because of the hardness of your hearts, almost implying that the law, that these rules were more of a compromise between God and Israel, rather than the exact will of God in all circumstances, but a compromise because of the hardness of Israel's heart. And so it's really interesting that I lost my notes. Yeah, so not necessarily the ultimate standard to which we are supposed to behave across all cultures and in all environments. Is a necessary step to reveal in us our sin and our need for a Savior. God commanded Israel to be different than the nations around them and use what was normal to them in that culture in order to reach them. God's been trying to bring us into harmony with one another, attempting to portray in us the real heart of what I believe God's character and the Bible insists on. And that is, all men are created equal and with intrinsic value, and all are created in the image of God. Shabbat shalom.